I actually remember the first time I toured with the Bloodstained Men. It was like the second day on the road, and I asked David Atkinson, who is the guy who plans all the tours. I said, David, is this a cult? Is this a cult? Is Bloodstained Men a cult? And he was just like,
Welcome back, Intactivists. This is the final part 4 of the interview between Scott and Tori Caswell.
what's so powerful is just how it only has to be done to one generation and then it repeats itself. And we can regurgitate reasons, but the real reason is because it's a cycle of abuse,
So then
right?
could it be broken in one generation then?
Yes, absolutely.
I think even with the Jewish people, because I know that there are Jewish people who really don't want to do this to their sons, but their communities pressure them.
Mhm.
And if they just felt like they had people backing them up saying, you don't have to, they wouldn't.
Yeah. Well, and if you look at the cut rate of Jewish communities living outside of the United States, circumcision is not as important to those Jewish communities in general. You might see pockets of Jewish communities that have really held on to the practice of circumcision. But if
Like,
you go to different countries, if you go to Australia, if you go to Canada, if you go to Poland or anywhere where there's Jewish people, which the Jewish people live everywhere, it's less of a cornerstone of the practicing of Jewish faith in general than it is in America. And what I think has happened in America is that the two have kind of created a positive feedback loop, right? So we see it as a Jewish practice. We also see it as an American practice. So American Jews are very, very focused on it because as a whole nation, we're already focused on it. And so that kind of fanaticism that it has to be done or you're not Jewish doesn't really carry when you look at Jewish communities worldwide, which I think is really interesting. If we can fight this on a cultural level, on an ethical level, that a lot of Jewish practicing communities and families would be happy to leave their children intact because that's just one aspect of it. And just like with everything else, religion evolves. Even if it's an ancient practice, it's still going to evolve in the modern age. That is the nature of everything that humans do, including religion. So the idea that it's going to stay the same is ridiculous, and it won't. And I hope that for Jewish boys, that practice falls out of favor for all religions, including for Muslim families, including people suffering from it in African cultures, especially when they do it at an older age and they are not able to get the correct post care. And you see those images coming out of Africa where men have horrible, horrible disfiguring results from their circumcision, especially when they're practiced within that context.
very good way to argue against any medical person who would say, oh, there's health benefits of circumcision, they'll get infected, all that, is to start asking, well, what's the functions of foreskin?
They don't know because they're not taught.
So when an intactivist does know, that proves a bit of credibility. You said you avoided nursery midwife
Mm-hmm.
because you didn't want to be around people like that who just had that mentality.
Yeah, I didn't want to go to nursing school. Part of nursing school is assisting with
Yeah.
circumcisions. And of course, I would, if I did go to nursing school, I would be a conscientious objector. I would not participate in that.
What if nurses did know? How could they stop it?
That's a really important point that we do need to evolve medical training. That's not really something that I think about because I haven't gone to medical school or nursing school, and I haven't really thought about that problem other than witnessing it. That's another front that intactivists need to push is education of our nurses and our doctors to include the functions of the foreskin. Now that is a lot more difficult because the medical model is not as conducive to intactivism, I think. And also, it's very, very profit driven. And again, here we are talking about the money aspect of it. And then also the doctors that are making the recommendations, right? The doctors that sit on the boards that decide what goes into these medical textbooks, that decide what the organizations are recommending. By and large, they are very pro circumcision for whatever reason. And that's really unfortunate. And that kind of means that it's going to take a lot of change within those institutions to see something like circumcision fall out of favor. And what we've seen is that it's become more favored. So that's why Brother K literally dedicated his entire retirement to ending circumcision, was because the AAP made such a pro-circumcision statement. And here we are, how many years past that statement being technically not even in effect. The benefits outweigh the risks statement from the AAP was only supposed to be in effect for 5 years, and it expired after 5 years, and they have not come out and said anything about circumcision after that. So they are essentially without a statement. There is no telling when they finally do come out with a updated statement if it will be the most pro-circumcision statement we've ever seen. If we continue to watch our institutions crumble, then it very well could mean not good things for that.
There are intactivists. They go to the hospital's medical boards to ensure that certain information that's given out to patients matches up with their policies and with research. And they do make changes when it doesn't.
That's awesome. I'm so happy to hear that they're doing that, because it takes being in the room and literally pushing a piece of paper with the actual science in front of their faces, because a lot of those men are circumcised. It's just like back to me educating a family that's expecting a baby. You know, the people that sit in those chairs and make those decisions, they are still people, and they are going to either let information in or not based on their own emotional status and their own physical status. I've been aware of that when I was doing press calls for bloodstained men. I know that whether or not this story gets ran very well may have to do with how the editor-in-chief feels about his own penis, right? And is that what should be curating our news?
No,
Deciding?
no, that's bias. Yeah, that's
Right.
the problem there.
Yeah.
If you were educating intactivists, meaning you had them all in a classroom and you had a curriculum, maybe a PowerPoint presentation, what would you teach them? Because it's very important that when they're talking to people, especially medically educated people, they have answers. They can refute certain claims of the common misconceptions about this. So how would you teach intactivists to make sure they're prepared to educate people and believe us and take our side?
Hey guys, it's me, Pots. I'm briefly interrupting this interview to let you know about the Pots e-commerce program. It is vital to keeping the Prevail Over the System channel alive. Go and join us on our Discord to learn more. And best of all, it's free to partake in the Pots e-commerce program, and we don't need any of your information whatsoever. This helps us keep the interviews coming along with other intactivist content to empower, teach, and update intactivists with very important information, as well as being the voice for the intactivist public. Thank you all so much. Okay, now back to the interview.
The first thing that I would say to a room full of intactivists is that all intactivism is needed. So the idea that there is one way to say it, or one message that needs to be pushed, or one narrative that is going to end it, I think is false. And the reality is that just as all people are unique and have unique experiences, unique value hierarchies, it's going to take a similar kind of constellation of approaches to reach people. So I don't know that there is one way or one thing to say or to do. I think that it takes everyone, just like the way that someone who is a Christian who can talk about how they feel about intactivism as it relates to their Christianity is going to be more effective than me, who's atheist, right? I'm not going to carry the same weight. As a trained medical professional looking to get licensure in the next year and a half, I do want to have those conversations with other medically trained people and be able to explain the physiology. And I do think that one of the most important things to know about, other than the physiology and the functions of the foreskin and the functions of the foreskin as it relates to sex, is also to talk about the ethical concerns. I think that talking about the ethical concerns is some of the most poignant points you can make. If you look at the article from Kate Decker, she is a PhD prepared RN. Her website is called Evidence-Based Birth. And she has a article about circumcision where she specifically talks about the medical claims and breaks down the research, and then specifically talks about the ethical concerns. So I think it's kind of those three things probably, is knowing the physiology of normal penis, knowing how to refute the medical claims, and then knowing the ethical concerns. You know, one of the things that I always talk about when someone's like, oh, well, the rates of UTI are lower. So here's the rates of UTIs for a cut population. And then maybe here's intact population. Intact have a little bit more rates of UTI. But guess who has even more rates of UTI by like exponentially more is female children. And what do? Antibiotics. And so the idea that we need to prophylactically amputate parts of babies to avoid an infection does not hold weight if you try to apply it to a female population. So that's a very useful thought experiment is, okay, tell me all the reasons that you want to circumcise. Now, use those reasons to justify female circumcision. And that it falls flat every time. And that is because we have let in the ethical concerns of female circumcision. It doesn't matter. It makes it prettier, cleaner, whatever. It doesn't matter. We are not going to hear it. As American people, we're like, no, that's wrong. We shouldn't harm. And that is part of that issue where we see male bodies as expendable. That is a double standard. It's because we see male bodies as more comfortable to harm and deeply cultural. And that's going to take more than just a conversation about the physiology, more than just a conversation about the refuting the medical claims. That's why I think the ethical implications of circumcision are so important to focus on as well.
What do you think got the people to believe that boys' bodies are less valuable, don't need to be protected as much?
That's a great question. I think that it probably has something to do with war. We are a colonizer country. We took this land by force, and we started our country by committing genocide on the native people. We have continued to have war after war after war, and for most of our history, it's only been male-bodied people going to war. It's only very recently that we have had women engaged in combat. And so I do think that there is a level of our cultural consciousness that has to accept that we are a warmongering culture, and we will take by force, and we will use our men to take by force.
There's profit in war, and if corporations are part of the military-industrial complex and they have any power over the government, they're going to try to push us into wars. I'm fine with women serving in the military, but I do believe that there's certain combative jobs that it's better for men to have. Still, even with that belief, you could still disapprove of cutting baby boys.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think women should fight as much as they want to. I think some of the bravest, most courageous warriors throughout history have been women. I don't think that it matters what your genitals are, if whether or not you're able to be an effective soldier.
Women aren't as strong as fast. The factor of running around with the men, keeping up with them while carrying your body armor and your ammo, which can weigh you down, especially the more tired you get, the heavier it's going to feel. There are certain jobs that women did well. I know that the Marine Corps had the Lioness program where they would go out with combat like infantry units in the Marines to talk to the women in Afghanistan because the men of their village did not approve of men talking to them.
One of my favorite authors, her name is Bastanek Young, is her last name. Her first name is escaping me. She was raised in the Children of God sex cult, and then she escaped it, came from Brazil to the U.S., and then entered into the U.S. military. And then she was one of the very first women to be combat. And she is a badass. And she wrote a book called Uncultured, where she's talking about the culting of America and kind of this rise in cults.
Yeah, like culture starts with cult.
Yeah, and she drew a lot of parallels between the Children of God sex cult and the U.S. military, and says explicitly that the U.S. military is a cult. And it's a cult that specifically is causing a lot of damage.
I kind of thought that it's an extremist group. Like, we all dress the same, wear the uniform, get told the same message. Mm-hmm. Is there much of a difference between an occult and extremist group?
And I think there's a lot of overlap. She has specific tenets that she's put out as what qualifies a group of people as a cult. And she's explicitly shared that she does think the U.S. military is a cult. I actually remember the first time I toured with the Bloodstained Men, it was like the second day on the road. And I asked David Atkinson, who is the guy who plans all the tours, I said, David, is this a cult? Is this a cult? Is Bloodstained Men a cult? And he was just like, I don't know. And I never thought about it before. And he started Googling it. Luke Artanis was there. And he was like looking it up and looking at the different ways of deciding if something is a cult. And we decided after some reading and research that no, intactivism and bloodstainment specifically is not a cult. It is an anti-cult. So we are opposing a cult practice. So genital mutilation is a cult practice at the core. And anytime you are organizing to oppose that, you are opposing a cult practice. And I felt really good about that. I was like, well, I'm right where I need to be then, because I am not into that.
Brother K told me that circumcision has become its own religion.
Yeah, and it's identity level shit. Because remember, if I got a facelift, then I wouldn't say I'm facelifted, right? It is not an identity level altercation to my body. Even though it changes my face, I'm not going to say I'm facelifted. Or if I get a mastectomy, my breasts removed, I'm not going to say I'm mastectomized. I'm not going to use that language to describe myself. But someone who is circumcised will always use that as an identity level. I am circumcised, not I was circumcised. It's almost always I am. And I think that there's an important distinction there, that there's some sort of deep identity level thing associated with it. Eric Klopper went into some of that. It's a way of controlling, and it's a way of being on the inside of a group. So it definitely is a cult practice, and it definitely has aspects of it that seem like a religion because people are dedicated to it.
Control the language, control people's thoughts.
All day.
That principle. Is there a way that you're going to teach, promote your midwifery thing? What's the future for that?
My timeline is to hopefully graduate in the next year and a half and start practicing as a midwife. And I may or may not continue on to do my master's. I have to have a master's level education in order to pursue my ultimate goal of becoming a professor. I'd love to work at the school that I attend now. It's a very progressive school. It's called Midwives College, Utah. It's all online. And I've already started the work of creating connections with my professors now. And every chance I get, I talk about this issue. Every paper that I can write on it, every presentation that I can give on it, I'm doing it on that. And I would love to impact that school long term. And also the midwifery school that's hopefully going to be founded here in Tulsa, and continue to influence midwifery as a profession, to explicitly motivate people to think of it as fertile ground for intactivism and do that work to close that gap and make it make sense. Because in reality, we shouldn't even be having to have this conversation at all, let alone about midwives.
How can you get more people involved in midwifery and or intactivism?
I think it's going to take continuing to have the conversation one person at a time and continuing to organize. I love to see all of the work that everyone is doing. It's all valid. Again, I don't think there's any one right way to do it. It's going to take everybody doing it in their unique way. As long as you aren't hurting people, and as long as it's mostly not illegal. Although, as our laws evolve, now that we have a dictator, I will become more and more comfortable with breaking. Because I don't follow fascist laws.
Anything else you'd like to say?
I don't think so. I feel like I was able to cover all the points that I wanted to talk about. Well, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate the work that you're doing, highlighting intactivist voices and asking these questions about how we can be more effective. And I think it's great. Thank you for what you do.
That's all I have to say.
Awesome.
Thank you for your time today, Tori. I hope that you're very successful in the future.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me on.
Okay, that was Tori Caswell, part 4. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. I'll put her links down in the description so you can follow her. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss our future intactivist interviews. and other Intalktivist content we will release every single week. Thank you guys so much for listening. Please share and like this video to get this out to more people. Bye!